Welcome to Making It with Terry Woolman, the show that explores the secrets, successes, and strategies for making it in the music biz. And now, here's your host, Terry Woolman.
Welcome to Making It. I'm Terry Woolman, and this show is about creating a successful life and what that means to my guest today, Sam Daley-Harris, author of Reclaiming Our Democracy, Every Citizen's Guide to Transformational Advocacy. I'd like to share my intention that inspires this podcast. Time passes quickly, and I've learned that we should do what's in our hearts and do it well without apologies or excuses. I encourage you to create your life and art in your own unique way and express your artistry with joy and abandon. Be willing to work uncompromisingly for what you believe in. Success will have a better chance of finding you when you live your life with integrity, focus, and passion. Be selfish with your discipline and selfless in your performance, and don't forget to have fun along the way. My guest today, Sam Daley-Harris, is a leader and innovator in the field of citizen advocacy with 40 years of experience developing and training others to use proven strategies that empower everyday people to become change makers. In 1980, Sam founded the anti-poverty lobby Results and the Results Educational Fund. In 1990, he organized the World Summit for Children's Candlelight Vigils. 4 years later, he released his book, Reclaiming Our Democracy, Healing the Break Between People and Government. In 1995, Sam founded the Microcredit Summit Campaign, along with Nobel Peace Prize laureate Muhammad Yunus and FINCA founder John Hatch. Over the next 12 years, the summit achieved its goal of reaching 100 million of the world's poorest families. That's right, reaching 100 million of the world's poorest families, especially the women of those families with microloans and other financial and business services. Sam founded Civic Courage in 2012, which helps train NGO members to create champions in Congress and the media for their cause. His latest achievement, the release of his 30th anniversary edition of Reclaiming Our Democracy, provides a powerful way to make a difference and heal our democracy in the process. It's not the only solution needed, but it is one essential missing piece: citizens awakening to their power. Sam Daley-Harris, welcome to Making It.
It's great to be here.
I'm so happy to see you, always. For those who don't know this about us, we have a long, beautiful, lifelong, beautiful history together. Both of us grew up in Miami. You a couple of years ahead of me, but we shared many a journey, and you were also my high school music teacher when you were starting to get into, that's right, into advocacy. Thank you for encouraging and inspiring me, by the way, to enjoy art and music and to embrace it. I'm grateful to you, Sam.
Thank you.
Yeah. So your 2024 revised and updated book has a new name. What was the intention of your updated title? Because they're the same, but they're different.
Yeah. And actually, this latest edition, 12 chapters were removed from the previous, and 7 new chapters, so it's got some serious alterations. But I want to share a quote. I may share 2 of them. I've been interviewed on a couple of national NPR shows.
Yeah.
And I've been moved by how vulnerable and how honest those hosts have been in their interviews. And I'm going to read question number 2. I did this in January 2024 on a show called 1A. And the host said, this is his quote, this is kind of why the book, actually. He said, "The passive nature to our politics now, you can feel beat down by it. I mean, this is my career and I feel beat down by it. It's much more of an effort for me. I don't participate in the same way others do because I'm a political journalist, but I do have to pay attention. It's a grind. It's a grind, Sam. I mean, I know you know that. What am I feeling? What's the way out of that? I'm not an activist, but you know what I'm saying." That's the answer to why releasing this 2024 edition of Reclaiming Our Democracy. My first answers to him were Apollo astronaut Rusty Schweikert said, "We aren't passengers on Spaceship Earth, we're the crew." And he went, And the question is, well, are we? And if we are crew, how does crew operate? And the second thing I said to him was, futurist and climate activist Alex Steffen said, in fact, these days, cynicism is obedience. Well, yeah, if I'm cynical, I'm obedient to the way things are. I mean, why am I going to do anything if I'm cynical about whether anything matters or whether my actions would matter? So that's an example. If you don't mind, I'm going to read one more. And this was on another show. It's called Here and Now.
Mhm.
It goes to maybe 400 stations. And this was one of the questions by the host, Deepa Fernandez. She said, one of the things I found really insightful in your book, you say, to move from passively caring about something, say the environment, climate change, these big things that are actually happening in our lives, to actually taking action, we have to, and I'm quoting from you here in your book, be honest about the hopelessness that's in all of us. I found that really struck a chord with me, Sam, because the issues we do care about sometimes seem massive and immutable. How do you move past that sense of hopelessness? Again, moved by the honesty, the vulnerability in front of I don't know, tens of thousands, I don't know how many listeners on these national shows. Um, yeah, it was just quite awesome. And it points to why a 30th anniversary? Why a 2024 edition? Because, the volume on the cynicism is rising, the volume on the discouragement and hopelessness is rising, and people need to see a way out.
Uh, do you feel, I mean, you're clearly a history buff because it's part of your job, to understand where we came from, where we are, where we potentially can continue to head or change the course of direction in our country's history regarding democracy, because
Yeah.
it's been shifting, it's been evolving, and
Mhm.
and I'm always, one of the things that I notice, and I've for many years spoken to younger people because we started our sensibility of activism in the 60s and 70s, growing up in that time, uh, which was more the norm, to be socially and
Yeah.
politically active, culturally active, to care to use our voices. I feel like our culture, especially the college age kids, the high school kids, college age, there is a sense of whatever or hopelessness. Um, and then adults, our peers, a lot of them are beaten down by what the news has become. It's just exhausting. I know I'm preaching to the choir right now, but any one small group of people could make a difference, especially college age, not kids, young adults
Yeah.
who aren't, I don't think, is politically, they just don't think their voice matters. They really don't. What do you say to that? Like, what do you tell them? What do we tell them?
Right. Well, there's so many ways to come at this. Um, Let me come at it this way. I'm going to come at it another way in a moment if
Mhm.
I can. I, there was a poll, actually a survey of ac advocacy professionals, the people who feed us actions, let's say, and 79% said a form email, give me your name and your zip code and we'll send the letter for you to your Congress. 79% said a form email is their primary tactic, their primary method. But only 3% of congressional staff said that was highly effective. Only 3%. So we're being fed all these not very effective things to do by staff. And we're not being fed, I'll give you the next number, 94% of congressional staff said an in-person constituent, that's us, issue meeting on an issue is somewhat or very effective, 94%. but we're not doing that. We're not being trained for that. And so it would make sense that that discouragement would ring pretty loudly, because so often we're given meaningless things to do,
Right.
and then we feel the meaninglessness of it.
Hmm.
Um, yeah. If
I
I
can
could
feed
take,
some of your words back to you as well. If
okay, go ahead.
may indulge me in a quote of
Yes,
yours
yes.
from the book. It might be hopelessness, despair, or a sense of being overwhelmed that initially prevents us from taking action on an issue we care about. When that hopelessness is replaced by a clear and inspiring vision of what is possible, the barrier to being effective is our inability to speak concisely and powerfully about the issue. You go on to say, the only antidote is to educate ourselves to be powerful speakers. We aren't dangerous to the conditions of ignorance and apathy until we speak to the issues powerfully. I love that you use the word dangerous in a positive way.
Yeah. So let me really get to the nub of the whole book,
Yeah.
and that's this. The whole book is really about transformational advocacy. Now, we all know transactional. Sign the petition, transaction complete. That's what we know.
Mhm.
Transformational advocacy is much less known, and gets to what you were reading about. It's when we're trained, encouraged, and succeed at doing things as an advocate that we never thought we could do, like meeting with a member of Congress and bringing them on board to our issue.
Mhm.
And when we do things we never thought we can do, there's a burst of confidence. We have a new confidence ourselves, a confidence actually in our democracy, and we see ourselves in a new light. So the whole book is about transformational advocacy, but most organizations we're involved with don't offer that. They don't provide, they don't deliver transformational advocacy. And so I've got two goals with the book. One is to really inspire nonprofit leaders to create structures that deliver transformational advocacy, and to encourage citizens to actively participate in those kinds of structures so we can more powerfully get off the couch and into the game.
So I have a question for you because this is a place in our conversation where we could clearly lose a fair amount of audience members who might
Yeah.
be presuming that
Okay.
because you are a political activist that you are pro or against a certain party,
Right.
Democrat,
Right.
Republican,
Right.
independent.
Right.
So, but your techniques, I believe in my heart, because I know you and I've read both books, devoured both books, speak to everybody. This is
Yeah.
it's not a particular political agenda.
Right. So I'm going to tell a story. When I'm working with a group who's working with a member of Congress who opposes their bill, I have them ask these three questions of the member of Congress. One, we know you don't support this bill. What would it take to change your mind?
Yeah, I love that question.
Two, could you say more about that? Three, why do you think that is? And so it's a deep listening exercise,
Yeah.
and you're listening for assignments. I have this friend, and I'm going to tell a different part of the story in a moment, who uh, he asked that question of members of Congress. He was looking for a Republican to co-lead a House Climate Solutions Caucus. And the member of Congress said, well, if you could bring the chambers of commerce on board. He did. Came back with letters from the presidents of the chambers. This is all in South Florida, actually.
Hmm.
Congressman said, well, if you could bring the mayors on board. He did. And he came back, and then the congressman jumped on as the lead Republican on this House Climate Solutions Caucus. Um, and so that's an example of how we really want this bridging, working together left and right and the like. The other thing I want to mention, and I'm going to say it in a different light, I've started to do a column for a democracy newsletter. It's called The Fulcrum. And I've written the first four columns. The first one's been published, the next three have not. But I've used song titles in all four. And I'm going to tell you the second one. It's going to be published soon. And the song title from Sarah Bareilles' song Brave,
Mhm.
the line is, "Show me how big your brave is." Wow.
Yeah.
With the state of our democracy,
Wow.
we need to be asking our nonprofit organizations how big their brave is, and also how big our brave is. And I'm going to go back to the fella I was talking to you about a moment ago. In his lone wolf days, when he was working on his own on climate change, the Senate essentially killed the Waxman-Markey climate legislation. It was about a decade ago. And he had a campaign going on, and he wanted to deliver a letter to every one of the 100 Senate offices. And he had actually 400 or 600 or 200 people would sign from each state. He walked into one office, gave them the letter with the signers from their state. He walked into the hall and realized he'd given them the wrong letter. He walked back in and said, "This is the right one. Could you give me the other one back?" And the person at the front desk had to fish it out of the garbage can, because in the 1 minute between handing it off and going to it had already been thrown in the trash. Well, show me how big your brave is. I mean, he didn't give up. I mean, he like got involved and doubled down and saw he needed to go much deeper than that. But I, I just so inspired
It's
by the,
fantastic.
yeah, yeah.
One thing that surprised me about what you wrote in a really beautiful way, uh, I'm going to ask you the question about this, but let me read another quote of yours. Most of us see advocacy as too hard or too frustrating, too complicated or too partisan, too dirty or too time consuming, too ineffective or too costly. But what if that's all wrong? What if deep engagement dissolves discouragement and can actually bring joy? What if you can become an advocate for a cause you care about and feel fulfilled, not frustrated? And what if engaging as an advocate is essential to protecting our democracy? I don't often hear the word joy used when discussing activism.
Okay.
It caught my
So
attention.
I'm going to read an excerpt from the book, but let me set it up. So I'm going to tell you the story of Maxine Thomas. I always say Maxine's amazing, and she is, but we're all amazing if we get the right coaching
Mhm.
and training. Maxine has a lived experience of poverty. She lives in Indianapolis, Indiana, and she joined a group called Circles. That's for people who want to work to move out of poverty. And in her Circles group, I think it's like a 14-week program. In her Circle group, they realized they had a story to tell. And so they looked around for organizations that could help them tell their story. They find results, and eventually Maxine gets a scholarship to go to the Results Conference in Washington, D.C. She borrows luggage to make the trip to D.C. And the night before her first ever meetings with her members of Congress, she realizes that the earned income tax credit is going to expire.
Mm.
And the earned income tax credit goes to low income families. In 2020, it was 3,100 that went as a refund to low income families. And I want to read what Maxine said. What was the word you used? Joy?
Joy.
Okay. Uh,
Yeah.
Euphoric is coming.
Okay.
But Maxine said, the first congressional meetings on Lobby Day was with Senator Dan Coates, a Republican of Indiana, and brought new ahas. He was there for the entire meeting. I can still feel it. I was a ball of emotions. It felt like an out-of-body experience. I was processing being in DC, and now I'm in an exclusive meeting. We're all dressed up. It was high level. The volunteers were polished and sharp, but I was scared. Now, that's everyone on the first meeting. That's what a breakthrough is about, going through to the other. But I was scared, worried whether I would say the right thing. I think it was Lisa who asked, "Would you like to say anything?" I thanked the senator and said, "I learned last night why I'm here. I didn't know I could come here from Indianapolis to meet someone, to meet with you, someone who represents us and can help us. I can't imagine what will happen if the earned income tax credit is taken away from families like mine. I'm able to take a deep breath and catch up on my bills because of the tax credit. I look forward to tax time because it's the only time I can handle my financial burden. And one more sentence, she said, I like to take my kids to the mall to buy shoes without worrying if it'll take away from other bills. Then the senator's waxes euphoric about how she is and how great it was.
Mhm.
And then she ends at the end of the day of all her meetings, she says, I was euphoric. I was on this high and felt I was part of something revolutionary. After she met all her reps and senators that year, I was euphoric. I was on this high and felt I was part of something revolutionary. Well, yeah, that's available if we find the right organization and we open ourselves up to it. Euphoric is a way different from cynical and hopeless, but
So
it's available.
what are some of these organizations?
Well, I'm going to mention them, but I'm going to talk about what they do first, and then I'll name some.
Great. And also
So,
let's tell people where they can go, to get these assets to your website.
okay, great. So the book's website is reclaimingourdemocracy.com. Actually, all the royalties go to Results, the anti-poverty lobby. I founded, and we'll talk about it maybe in a
Mhm.
moment.
Yeah.
But there are three things to look for in an organization to see if it's delivering transformational advocacy. One, recruitment and building community. Recruitment is bringing new people in, not to build an e-blast list, but real people talking to real people and forming them into chapters so they're not working alone. That's the recruitment part. And building community might be a monthly whole of organization webinar with guest speakers and Q&A and inspiration, recruitment and community building. Two, training. How do you get a meeting with a member of, how do you plan for the meeting? How do you write a letter to the editor? How do you do all of these things? Three, encouraging breakthroughs. The organization encourages you to do things you thought you couldn't do. And as a result, you have new bursts of confidence. There's a drawing in the book, small circle labeled your comfort zone. And next to it is a much larger circle labeled where the magic happens.
Yeah.
Well, you're looking for an organization that doesn't kick you out, but encourages you out of your comfort zone over to where the magic happens. And some of the groups that I've worked with that do this are Results, the anti-poverty lobby, global and domestic poverty. They form people into chapters. They have a whole organization webinar. They do training. They encourage people to have breakthroughs. That was Maxine, who said, I was euphoric.
Hmm.
I was on this high and thought I was part of something revolutionary. Yeah. Another is Be Citizens Climate Lobby, working on climate change. The Quaker Lobby, FCNL, Friends Committee on National Legislation on peace issues mostly, and Catholic Relief Services are all groups that I've worked with. Maybe I could tell people how I moved from Terry Woolman's high school music teacher to activist.
Yeah.
And I was mentioning earlier
Yeah.
that I'm doing this column, and it turns out that I haven't figured out the fifth one yet, but the four columns have a song title as their title and their kickoff. And the fourth column at the moment is the Alicia Keys. Well, it starts with
Hmm.
the Alicia Keys song, We Are Here. I use the phrase, why we are here. I'm not gonna, I'm a percussionist, but we are here. We are here for all of us. We are here for all of us. That's why we are here. So maybe people remember it. And the whole thing is about, why are we here? What's our why? And in activism, knowing your why and sharing it. This was the story of self was developed by Harvard professor Marshall Gans. Basically asks what happened in your life and what decisions did you make that got you to this moment, to this commitment. And so I'm going to tell a shortened version of my story of self, which I tell in that column that's titled Why We Are Here, kicking off of Alicia Keys' song. So basically,
May I interject really quickly?
yeah,
Because I just want to say, yes, you were a high school music teacher, as if that weren't magnificent enough on its own, and quite a large um, mission to take on, and to change the course of so many people's lives. But you were also a classically trained percussionist. You're
yeah,
not just a percussionist. You were in the Miami Symphony
right. And
for
actually,
years.
that's
Great.
what's coming next. So
Okay.
well, I tell this all the time. And when I meet someone new in activism, when I'm talking to a group on an interview on a radio or whatever, I have a bachelor's degree and a master's degree in music. And I played percussion instruments in the Miami Philharmonic Orchestra for 12 years and taught high school music. And 44 years ago, I founded the anti-poverty lobby Results. And a lot of times I'm asked, music, poverty lobby, what's the connection there? And when I look back in my life, there's certain experiences that start pointing me in a different direction. The death of a friend around high school graduation in 1964 and the assassination of Senator Robert Kennedy around college graduation in 1968 started me asking the questions of purpose. Why am I here? What am I here to do? What's my purpose? In 1977, 9 years later, I'm invited to a presentation on ending world hunger, and I go to this event thinking, well, hunger's inevitable. What do I know? I'm still a musician. I mean, it's inevitable. In my mind, it's because there must be no solutions, because if there were solutions, somebody would have done something by now. But I go to this event, it's obvious right away because I hadn't thought about it much. There's no mystery to growing food or clean water, basic health, literacy. I'm not hopeless about the perceived lack of solutions. I'm hopeless about human nature.
Mm,
People
mhm.
would just never get around to doing the things that could be done. But there's one human nature I have some control over, my own, and my questions. Why am I here? What am I here to do? So I get involved in a big way. This is the end of the story. In 1978 and 79, I spoke to 7,000 high school students, classroom by classroom, on ending world hunger. And before I went into the first classroom, I read some statements from Jimmy Carter's Commission on World Hunger and others calling for the political will to end hunger. So I asked 7,000 students, what's the name of your member of Congress? I don't want to know if you wrote him. I don't want to know if you met him. Just the name.
Right.
200, fewer than 3% could tell me. 6,800, over 97% could not tell me the name of their member of Congress. And results grew out of this gap between the calls for the political will to end hunger on the one hand and the lack of basic information on who represented us in Washington on the other.
Mm.
So the we are here for all of us. That's why we are here. Why we are here. That why are we here question, that story of self in activism is really critical. Know your why and share it. And I would say critical in life too.
And also, your story really emphasizes a major point, which is you don't have to be a radical activist, anything to be involved in activism. You can become the things that are required to make a change, a
Yeah,
positive change,
yeah,
which has a different definition of what is a
yeah,
positive change.
yeah,
But but the thing is, again, can you? So it's for anybody, music, symphony musician, music teacher, housewife, garbage collector,
yeah,
any gender, any size, shape, age, anything. You can be in junior high school and get involved.
yeah.
And so there's no age limit. It's all inclusive.
Right, right. And sometimes you're kind of like trial and error and you're kind of doing the best you can. You're trying to learn what's going on. I'm going to try and find another story. I didn't market in
While you're
my,
looking, I'm going to read a
yeah,
quote from President Jimmy Carter.
go for it.
Since you mentioned President Carter, President Jimmy Carter called the first edition of Reclaiming Our Democracy a roadmap for global involvement in planning a better future. It's so clearly defined
Yeah,
by somebody who really lived and his whole life is dedicated to
yeah,
exactly that mission statement.
yeah, big time,
Yeah,
big time. So this story is I'm now a substitute teacher in the LA school district.
right.
And I'm starting this fledgling little anti-pop fledgling, no paid staff for 4.5 years.
Late
This
70s,
anti,
early 80s. When
this
was
is
that?
82,
Right.
81, 82.
Right.
And it's a long story. We organize these candidate events for candidates. And I have an appointment with a writer for the LA Times. And I tell her that I talked to editorial writers on TV stations. Back then, TV stations did editorials, and they didn't think hunger was a state or a local issue. And then she asked, she was very concerned, did you call the LA Times? I said, I did, but they wouldn't call me back. And she said, well, who'd you call? And I said, well, Kay Mills was the only woman editorial writer in about 1982 at the LA Times.
Mhm.
Oh, don't, sorry, I called the editorial page editor. And she said, oh, don't call him, call Kay Mills, the only woman editorial writer. And so in the book, I talk about, I go into a payphone, who remembers that, at LeConte Junior High in Hollywood
Right.
on a break. And I call Kay Mills on the payphone. And she said, well, it was going to be a World Food Day candidate forum. We don't do editorials on days, Labor Day, World Food Day. Let's pick an issue and do one. And I promised to send her materials. And this is what I said. Oh, sorry. So that telephone call in the payphone booth and the editorial that followed altered my sense of myself and what was possible. Don't forget, I was going back to my substitute teaching classroom.
Right.
It was normal for me to distribute 100 photocopies of an action sheet or important article. But when that first editorial appeared, I remembered thinking, not only has the LA Times written this editorial, but they've made 1 million copies of it, and they've delivered it for us too. My early morning dash to the front yard to pick up the LA Times, now, of course, we get it on our phone now instead, was my run to democracy.
Mm.
I realized that I had the right job to make a difference, substitute teaching.
Yeah.
I realized that I had the right training to make a difference, music. I realized I had the right bank account to make a difference, nearly zero.
Right.
I realized that making a difference wasn't a function of any of these. It was a function of commitment and persistence.
Mm.
And so, I was this substitute teacher with an empty bank account,
Mm-hmm.
running to the front yard back then to pick up the newspaper with the editorial I'd helped generate in the LA Times. So, yeah, you can, we train people now. We were getting trained
Right.
back then,
Yeah.
so we could then train others with what we learned.
Can you clarify something for me? And then I want to talk about techniques for success in creating change, because that's what you teach. That's what you train people for creating, for turning an idea into an action,
Yeah.
into a solution.
Yep.
So how many of these organizations that you are involved in and have co-founded along the way are bipartisan? Like how do we get all of them?
Yeah.
Okay.
They're all, yeah. So it's one of the tenets of transformational advocacy.
Right.
And it's something you just need to focus on, and you want to make sure that it works that way. That's just the way we do it. If I could give you an example of a success,
Mhm.
because here's this guy, he's worked on democracy and global poverty, but I don't think anything's gotten any better yet. What's he doing out there? And actually, because this is the part people don't know,
Right.
when Results started lobbying in 1984 on child survival, UNICEF, the UN Children's Fund, was reporting that 40,000 children around the world were dying every day
Yeah.
from preventable things, things like measles, coupled with malnutrition. Oral rehydration therapy could solve dehydration that was killing kids in the millions. Results volunteers lobbied every year between 1984 and today. And the latest numbers from UNICEF is that the 40,000 child deaths a day have fallen by 66% to 13,800 a day, still scandalously high.
Mm-hmm.
But how many people can be part of an organization that played a key advocacy role
Right.
in that kind of change? And so that's an example of long-term, 40 years, 66% decline. It's got to go. I mean, the world leaders say it could go to zero
Mm-hmm.
by 2035, but not if we're
By
sitting on.
2035. Do you see
Yeah,
that? I know you see it as possible.
yeah.
Do you see it
Well,
in our
to be
lifetime?
honest, my whole deal with speaking about the book and getting out there about the book is to get more organizations to make their volunteers more powerful,
Right.
so that those kinds of goals, with climate goals,
Mm-hmm.
you name it,
Right.
can really come to
Gun
fruition.
control, and all the various, yeah,
Yes, exactly, exactly. And
because
so,
it's the same idea. You're looking at making the world a better place
yeah, and
and
people
a
don't
global
know.
community.
Yeah, and people don't know how.
Right.
We were talking before we came on about young people and the role that young people can play. And sadly, many young people have been fed mostly these petitions and whatever.
Mm-hmm.
But I want to give you two statistics that are really interesting. Well, I'm going to give you four. When Donald Trump was elected, 100 million Americans did not vote.
Right. Right.
When Joe Biden was elected, 80 million did not vote. In the last midterm, only 23% of youth voted, and it was the second highest youth turnout in a midterm. 23%. I'll give you a better one, actually, to cheer you up a little bit, which is 80% of youth who are registered do vote. Only 23% voted, but 80% of those who are registered
Right.
go ahead and vote. I mean, so, I'm kind of saying, think about young people in your life, sons, daughters, grandsons, granddaughters, nieces, nephews, neighbors, students, guitar students, whoever,
Mm-hmm.
you know, talk to them about voting and registering. And of course, in my world, voting is critically important, but so too is the time between elections. Of course, the book is mostly about the time between elections. So,
Thanks for sharing those statistics.
yeah,
They're enlightening. Since we're speaking about that demographic, let me share a few questions from my intern team
right.
who wanted the opportunity to reach out to you to comments and questions.
Yeah.
One of them, Annika, asked, "How can we hold on to hope for representation and progress, even in situations that may feel lose-lose?"
Yeah. Again, you need to find an organization that's going to feed you power,
Mm-hmm.
basically. And I know that, like, groups like Results, I'll tell this. I did a workshop maybe 8 years ago, and the head of Citizens Climate Lobby said, we have a lot of young people in Citizens Climate Lobby. For us, a young person is anyone under 64, which of course he was joking about. But since then, they and the other organizations
Mm-hmm.
have made big strides to bringing in young people. Results has a cohort of 50 to 70 young people every year
Mm.
that meet twice a month and get
Right.
training and meet with members of Congress. So I'm really urging people, young people and everyone, but young people in this case, to find those organizations that feed you power, that help you work left and right together, that tell you that you can do more. I'm going to read one other little excerpt. This is from she's amazing author. We're all amazing if we find the right training and coaching. Um, uh, her name is Ellie Sparks. She was a volunteer at the time of this story. Now she's on staff with Citizens Climate Lobby. And she said, when I joined CCL, I was suffering from climate trauma.
Mm.
I would read Bill McKibben's book, Earth, and I would weep at home and I would weep at work. And then she joined CCL, and 18 months later, she's leading a workshop on building relationships with members of Congress and editorial writers. She goes through this whole thing about uh, her role model for relationships is romantic relationships. So she uses romance as her model. It's a
Mhm.
great quote, and I'm not going to do the whole thing right now. But at the end, she says, during our conference, I met with 20 congressional offices. These are mostly Republican offices in this case. I met with many folks whose view of the world was very different than mine. Going into their offices was hard. I had to let go of a lot of emotional baggage. I could no longer judge them and hold hostility in my heart toward them. I had to let go of my fear of climate change and my fear that they wouldn't listen to me. I had to center myself in love, releasing fear and centering in love. This is sacred and profound work.
Mm.
End of quote. Well, who thinks of political advocacy as sacred and profound work?
Right.
And again, obviously, it's available if you find the right organization to coach you and train you, and you open yourself up to it. And so that is an example about we need to be the bridgers.
Yeah.
I was
It's
reading
a
this.
beautiful quote.
Yeah, yeah,
Mm.
it's really gorgeous, and it's really hopeful that, you can go into tough situations, but releasing fear and centering in love,
Mhm.
and then going in this is sacred and profound work. Um,
That leads to another intern question from our
okay.
team. Uh, I'm paraphrasing to keep these short, but Chloe was saying, I think a key to reestablishing order and democracy is removing the stigma and negativity around being blue or red and fighting for each other instead of against each other. Easier said than done. Her question is, what are key components to create harmony in civil discourse in our divisive political landscape?
Yeah. So again, when I do an interview, I imagine people going, this guy's right. I'm going to get out there on Facebook and rant right now.
Right.
No, no, no. It's not about that. It's really about finding a community, finding a group, finding an organization that can hold your hand and that can guide you in uh, causing these healings, basically. Um, that's really what we want to do. I'm gonna tell another quick story. This is a young person. His name is Aaron Carrillo. He has also a lived experience of poverty, and he goes to after his freshman year in the summer of college, he goes to Vietnam for the summer, and he's working. He said, I'm below poverty in the United States, but I'm working with kids here half my age, 9 and 10 years old, who are working and get $1 a day for their work. He goes back to campus. A young woman asks him to help start a chapter of results. He starts a chapter of results, and along the way, he has this horrible meeting with his member of Congress. And the member of Congress leaves abruptly and early, and it seems really terrible. And he says, this is not the last time the congressperson is going to hear from me. I think that Voices of Everyday People slogan is sinking in and their tears are welling up. And the congressional aide comes up, oh, no, no, the congressman didn't mean that. And the aide gets them into every meeting they ask for and tells them when the congressman will be back home at town hall meetings. He's really their partner. And there's a series of victories. The congressman doesn't say yes to everything, but there's some victories along the way.
Mhm.
And Aaron says, I realize that I have a seat at the table
Mm,
and that I know how to pull a seat up if there isn't one there.
mm, mhm.
Well, that's what we all need to know. We need to know there's a seat at the table for us. And if it's not there, we know how to pull one up. And this is a young person. I mean, when he was telling the bulk of that story, he must have been 19 or 20 in his sophomore year of college. So, and he's still active right now.
So this
Uh,
kind of advocacy that you train people to teach people,
Transformational advocacy. Yeah, go ahead.
transformational advocacy is relationship based. It's not like you said, getting on social media and ranting. It's about
No,
developing one-on-one relationships with
yeah,
congressmen, congresswomen, their associates, their team members, their staff, and it's not a one and done, and it's not if you get shut down then you failed.
right.
There,
But well, don't
there's
you don't forget the guy whose letters were put in the garbage can a minute after he walked out, and or this guy who was saying, I'm not going away, even though this
right.
was a very discouraging meeting. Yeah,
Can you share? Um, I know your stories because I remember when you were doing this with co-creating the Microcredit Summit Campaign, where again over a period of hard work and focus and unlimited or limitless thinking, like of what might be possible.
yeah,
You achieved the goal of reaching 100
yeah,
million of the
yeah.
world's poorest families, and I'm curious what the most valuable and unexpected lessons you learned while co-creating that program, because that whole idea of that program wasn't just to go to the poorest countries and then find the poorest villages, but I remember you telling me years ago that the people who came to say, I'm the poorest person, can
Right,
you
right.
help me,
No,
fund get a goat, so I can,
no,
that's not who you started with. You
no,
went
yeah.
deeper. Can you share
So
that?
to be clear, what the Microcredit Summit was the advocacy part, and we would bring in the practitioners
Yeah.
uh, who were doing it on the ground. And we would help them learn from each other. And again, it's always important, this whole structure of support. The first microcredit summit we held was in 1997, and 2,900 people came to DC from 137 countries,
Wow.
including five presidents and prime ministers, five first ladies, the Queen of Spain and the Queen of Belgium, and 2,880 others, kind of thing. And we had a regional or a global conference every year where people would come together and learn from each other, and what are the new insights and what are the new trainings, and what are the new skills that we need to pull this off. But the bottom line is, it all began for me with Muhammad Yunus, who's under attack from his government. God protect him, but
For what?
um, for for nothing,
Okay.
for political reasons. I
Yeah.
mean, it's all that again. Um, but where he made a $27 loan total to 42 people, it was like 60 something cents per person back in 1976. And what grew to become Grameen Bank, a bank of 9 million,
Mhm.
mostly women borrowers, starting with 27 people, 42 people getting a grand total of $27 to be freed from the moneylender
Right.
so that they could pay off the moneylender, buy their own bamboo, make their own stool, and sell it to whomever, not be forced to sell it back to the moneylender. Total inspiring stories. I mean,
And in addition to bringing in women to give the loans to, not men, you
yeah,
also you created groups. Like they weren't in
absolutely. And
isolation in their success.
his goal was to get to 50-50 men and women. And when
Mhm.
they got there, they realized that a loan and a business through the woman of the family accrued more to the kids and the well-being of the family
And
than
the
through
men.
the man. And so that's when they were just learning a lot, They had
Right.
97% women
Mhm.
in their microloans kind of thing. So yeah, it's yeah.
It's fantastic.
Yeah, there's lots of reason to be discouraged, but there's lots of things out there that are totally inspiring, including ourselves if we get the right training and get into gear.
Let's talk about techniques for
Yeah,
success in creating change. Uh,
yeah,
I'll throw these out from your book, and then you can elaborate
yeah.
on them. Be prepared, be courteous, be inspiring. That sounds like being a musician or a businessman or a woman
Right,
or
right.
anything.
And so that's the training part. Like, how do you get the meeting? How do you plan for the meeting? What do you ask for in the meeting? You can't wing it. I mean, you could, but that's not going to turn out great. Yeah. So,
Preparation is not underrated
no, no,
for anything that you want to be
no,
great at.
exactly. Exactly.
I mean,
Yeah.
you didn't end up playing in a symphony just by winging it
Exactly. Yeah.
or becoming an educator or an
Exactly.
activist,
Yeah.
a
Yeah.
transformational activist.
Yes.
Acknowledge previous actions, make specific request. Like you're not, you teach people to not be afraid to ask for things and to ask for big
Yeah.
things.
Well, let me see. I'm going to go to another thing with this too, but yes. So thank them for what they've done and be clear about what your next request is. The question that always comes up, and it's in the book. So wait a minute, you say transformational advocacy is really important, and very few groups do it. Why do
Mhm.
do very few groups do it? And my answer is the fear of making big asks of volunteers. That the organizations, like if they put an e-blast list, they can easily check how many opened it, how many checked through. You don't have to talk to anybody. You don't have to hear no from anybody. And so it's that fear of making big asks of volunteers that keeps organizations operating in the comfort zone,
Mhm.
in their safe space, rather than moving to where the magic happens.
What do
So
can you give an example of a big ask versus a small ask?
yes, yes, yes. So for example, when I'm training a group to start a chapter, and let's say there are 20 in the room, and let's hope 10 raise their hand and say, I'm in, I want to be in this chapter. One of the big asks is we're going to start this chapter with a 4-part new group training every week for 4 weeks, 90 minutes. The staffer who's maybe new might think, wow, nobody's going to agree to a 4-part new group training. So they'll make it a tiny ass, water it down, apologize for it. Well, no, in the book, I talk about Mike Robinson, and they were going to have their first conference call. And he said to me, we're only 2 or 3 months old, but we've already met with 4 state legislators in Washington state. And one of the 4 is chair of the Committee on Energy and Environment. And he knew everything about climate change, but knew very little about our issue, which was climate restoration, removing carbon from the app that's already up there. And he said, the state representative said he wanted us to train, do a briefing for him and his staff on carbon removal. And I said, well, wait a minute. So you met with 4 state reps already and you're 2 or 3 months old. Uh, had you ever met with a state rep before? Oh, no, I'd never met with any elected official. I said, had you ever written an elected official? I'd never written, called, or met. This was all new to me. And I said to him, put that in your talk. He was going to talk on the conference call. Because if you don't say it, people are going to think, oh, he's an expert. I'm not an expert.
Mhm.
He could do it. I can't do it. And it was because his group had a 4-part new group training. They knew how to get the meeting. They knew what to ask for and how to plan the meeting. And they were just a few months old and they'd already met with 4 state elected officials. So that's a big ask, actually. It's not like sell your home and give the money to the organization or quit
Right.
your job and volunteer here full time. No, a 4-part new group training. Well, if you for that, you also then have to deliver a powerful 4-part new group training. You can't deliver something that's weak and tepid, then you're
Right.
wasting people's time.
So
Yeah.
most of the groups that are put together are talking about a once a week commitment for 90 minutes to meet, and then additional for
And then
four
once
times,
that's over, four sessions,
four
and when
sessions.
that's over, they typically have the monthly conference call
Hmm.
with guest speakers and Q&A, and often a second meeting of the month. And
Right.
then they'll write letters to the editor at it. They'll plan for their meeting with their elected official. They'll see if they want to table around Earth Day. They'll see what, the different kinds of actions that they can take.
Right. And that could be specifically tailored to things that are personally important to them, be it
Yeah,
climate change,
yeah,
climate recovery,
exactly.
gun
Yeah,
control issues,
yeah, yeah, yeah,
apathy for getting people to register and vote, not just
yeah,
register,
yeah, yeah,
all of those things. So people can customize their experience
yeah,
based on their passion.
yeah, yeah.
It's not cookie cutter.
Find a, no, no, find a group that's working on the issue that you're most, and don't work on 10. Oh, you can
Right.
click around on a bunch. Focus
Right.
and go deep on one. It really, yeah,
In you do a lot of interviews,
yeah,
and some really wonderful ones that are up on your website,
yeah,
that I've been watching and listening to recently, and absolutely enjoying and being educated, inspired by, illuminated on the
yeah,
process. But in all of the interviews that you do, and I know that you have no issue, or shyness about expressing yourself, or lack of facts and information,
yeah.
but is there anything that you typically don't get a chance to really talk about that you would like to focus on for the last few minutes of our conversation? What's important to you to share right now?
Yeah. Well, I mean, uh, it really goes back to that we aren't passengers on Spaceship Earth. We're the crew.
Hmm.
We really are. We could be much better crew than we are. And it's available, but we have to find that organization, whether it's a group like Results on Global and Domestic Poverty, or Citizens Climate Lobby on climate change, or whether it's the Quaker Lobby, FCNL, on peace issues, or whether it's Catholic Relief Services, which is on global poverty issues. Those kinds of groups are working, they're not always successful, on delivering transformational advocacy. And, I think people will find inspiration in the book at reclaimingourdemocracy.com, where they can uh, learn about this all. You can't see the subtitle, Every Citizen's Guide to Transformational Advocacy. And, like the musician who wants their music to be heard, I'm that musician who wants the idea of transformational advocacy to be out there in the world. And so people can take part and not feel sidelined, really.
I want to ask you our three closing questions and then give you final thoughts. Since, and I've asked you this previously because you were on our show probably 7 years ago or
Okay.
something.
Yeah,
Um, but times have changed, your experiences change, you're older, wiser. Uh,
definitely older. Go ahead.
what does, and I ask this of all of my guests, since this show is called Making It, what does making it mean to you both personally and professionally, but more importantly, based on everything we've been speaking about today?
Yeah, making it is people get lit up about the difference they can make. That's making it
Yeah.
in this particular uh, world. And so yeah, I have 45 speaking gigs like this, just trying to get the word out
Yeah.
and light people up about the difference they can make.
Hmm.
Yeah. Citizens awakening to their power.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Say that again.
Citizens, it's not the only solution needed, but it's one crucial missing piece. This is like the American flag as a puzzle with a
Puzzle,
missing
puzzle.
piece.
Right,
That's
right.
us. Um, it's one crucial missing piece, citizens awakening to their power.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Can you share 3 tips for success that have not only driven your career, but driven your mission in life?
Well, let me think. I would always say find an organization that will empower you.
Yeah.
That's one. Um, be drawn to inspiration. Find it out, seek it out, listen to those players or speakers or whatever's kind of thing. I don't not watch the news, but there's this column, find the activism that won't make you miserable. Basically saying plant trees and work in soup kitchens because political activism will make you miserable. No, not really, if you find the right one.
Hmm.
Uh, and yeah, don't give up.
Don't
Do
give up.
not give up. Do not give up.
My closing question is, at this point of your life, with everything that you know to be true, what would you tell your younger self?
Well, I think I was blessed by being able to pay attention.
Hmm.
Um, how do I say that? Like, so when I lost a friend at high school graduation and Robert Kennedy was assassinated, and I had these questions: Why am I here? What am I here to do? What's my purpose? I mean, I didn't ask it every day. I didn't wake up in a tizzy going, "Oh my God, what's my?" No, I just paid attention. And so at some level, I was blessed that I was able to pay attention,
Hmm.
uh, and um, and kind of wended this way and wended that way. But there was always this: Why am I here? What am I here to do? As even though it tacked left or tacked right, and I'm actually glad that my younger self did that.
Hmm.
And I think we could all benefit from um, just paying attention to your why, paying attention to things that matter.
Yeah. The book is called Reclaiming Our Democracy: Every Citizen's Guide to Transformational Advocacy. It's available on Amazon, Barnes and Noble, indiebound.org, at your website as well. Please tell everybody where they can find you.
Yeah,
What did you say?
reclaimingourdemocracy.com, all royalties to Results, the anti-poverty lobby. And let's have a blast.
Let's have a blast. It's great to be able to end on a laugh because some of this can be very overwhelming,
Mhm.
but also you've reminded me how inspiring and joyful. And what was the other word that you had used from
Euphoric.
euphoric?
I was euphoric.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Closing words, Sam?
Well, I'm going to do the longer quote. The short one from Alex Steffen was, in fact, these days, cynicism is obedience. Actually, the longer quote is this one: Optimism is a political act. Those who benefit from the status quo are perfectly happy with a large population of people who believe nothing will get any better. In fact, these days, cynicism is obedience. What's really radical is being willing to look right at the magnitude and difficulty of the problems we face and still insist we can solve those problems. End of quote.
There you have it. Sam, it's a joy.
I love you.
I love you too. It's great to see you. Thank you for sharing your passion and your your map to
Great.
success, your
Great.
guide to how to
Yeah.
get involved at whatever degree you want to be involved
Yeah.
in.
Yeah.
I would encourage everybody, regardless of what your belief is and who you stand behind, to register to vote and
Mhm.
vote. Use your voice.
And get
It's
others to register and young people to register.
yeah,
Yes,
yeah,
absolutely.
absolutely. Sam Daley-Harris, thank you so much. It's great to see you always.
It's a thrill. Thank you.
I want to thank everybody who has joined us on this conversation today. To our audience, we really appreciate you. And everybody stay safe, stay inspired, stay active. You know, put your foot in it. You actually have a voice. Use it. Thanks, everybody. See you next week.
Tune in again next week for another great episode of Making It with Terry Woolman.